I don't usually go camping alone. I enjoy it, but I've always been the kind of person who prefers company on trips like that. Not because I'm afraid of the woods or the dark, but because something about sharing silence under trees and stars makes it all feel a little less empty. But that weekend, I decided to go solo. I'd had a rough month. Work was piling up, my sleep had been all over the place, and I'd started to feel that constant itch just under the skin. The one that tells you to get away from everything before it caves in on you. I didn't tell anyone where I was going. I turned off my phone, threw my gear into the back of my car, and headed north. There was a state forest I'd been to once before with a couple of buddies years ago. About 6 or 7 miles of trail led into a small, lightly used camping area by a shallow creek. It was out of the way, quiet, and just remote enough to feel like you were somewhere far from the world. I got to the trailhead around noon. The parking lot was empty. The air was crisp but not cold, and there wasn't much wind. Just the kind of conditions I wanted. I locked the car, strapped on my pack, and started walking. The trail was well maintained at first. Tall pines lined both sides, their needles softening the ground underfoot. The deeper I went, the more it changed. The trees started growing closer together, and the sunlight filtered down in thin streaks, painting the forest floor in gold and green. I didn't pass anyone. I didn't even hear distant voices or footsteps. It was dead silent, apart from birds and the occasional rustle of branches above me. Still, I wasn't worried. That was what I came for. Took a little over 2 hours to reach the site. It was just as I remembered. A flat patch of ground near a slow-moving creek, with large stones scattered around and a few ancient tree stumps for sitting. A fire pit someone had made years ago still sat in the middle, ringed with rocks blackened by soot. It looked unused for a while. I unpacked, pitched my tent, filtered some water, and made a quick meal. I didn't plan on doing much that day, just unwind, read, maybe walk along the creek a little. The first few hours were peaceful. I sat by the water and watched minnows dart between stones. I saw a deer move quietly through the trees across the stream, pausing once to drink before continuing on. I even lay down on my back in the dirt and let the sun warm my face for a while. I felt the tension start to loosen in my chest. I thought this was a good decision. The only sound was the trickling water and the gentle creak of the trees. I felt all right. It wasn't until close to dusk that I felt it. I can't explain what changed. Nothing obvious. No sound, no movement. Just this strange wave of discomfort that came out of nowhere. One moment I was fine, and the next my skin prickled like I just walked into a room and realized someone was standing behind me. I turned, expecting to see something. Maybe an animal, maybe a person, but there was nothing. The feeling didn't leave. I tried brushing it off. Told myself it was just a moment of unease. Something my brain cooked up because I was alone and the light was changing. That happens sometimes, right? Your senses play tricks on you. But this wasn't like that. It wasn't a jump scare or a jolt of fear. It was a slow, heavy pressure, like I was being watched from a distance by something that meant me harm. I don't know how else to say it. It felt intentional, focused. I walked a slow circle around the site. I checked the tree line, the creek, even climbed onto a boulder to get a better view. Still nothing. The forest was quiet. Still. Too still, maybe. I realized then that the birds weren't singing anymore. I tried to shake it. I really did. I forced myself to sit back down, made a fire, and ate a second meal even though I wasn't hungry anymore. I pulled out the paperback I'd brought, stared at the words, and didn't process a single sentence. That sensation, the wrongness, clung to me like cold water. My ears kept straining, like they were trying to pick up a sound just out of reach. Every few minutes I'd turn my head sharply toward a shadow, certain I saw movement, only to find nothing. But it wasn't the shadows that bothered me. It was the feeling that something wanted me to feel afraid. By full dark, I'd lost all interest in the fire. I let it burn low and sat inside my tent. I kept the zipper open so I could still see out into the campsite. I didn't feel better in the tent. The fabric walls weren't protection. If anything, they just blocked my view. It was like sitting inside a thin plastic bag, and it made my nerves spike higher. I lay there, fully clothed, boots still on, with my flashlight in my hand. I hadn't packed a weapon, not even a knife bigger than a small folding one. I usually don't. I'd never needed one. Sleep didn't come. I kept thinking I'd hear twigs snapping or see something move across the tent opening. But there was nothing. Just the same creeping sensation that something was out there. Not just present, but aware of me. Like it knew I was there. Like it had been waiting for me. It wasn't until somewhere deep into the night, past midnight I think, that I started hearing something real. It was subtle at first. Not footsteps, but movement. A soft rustling in the dry needles and leaves, low to the ground. Too slow and deliberate to be the wind. I didn't sit up, didn't shine the flashlight. I just lay there and listened. It circled the camp. I'm certain of that. I'd hear it to the left for a few minutes, then silence. Then behind me, then across the creek. Always just far enough away to stay hidden. Kept its distance, but it never left. Sometime close to dawn, the sound stopped. The pressure in my chest stayed, but the movement ended. I finally passed out from exhaustion. Not real sleep, just those brief blackouts your brain gives you when it can't take any more. I woke up with the sun already up. My back ached from the way I'd slept, and I had a knot in my neck that made me wince when I moved. For a second, I almost believed I'd imagined the whole thing. I stepped out of the tent, blinked in the light, and immediately scanned the tree-line. Everything looked normal, bright, peaceful. I even saw a squirrel dart up a tree near the fire pit. Then I saw the tracks. They weren't shoe prints. They were too small, too wide. Pads, claws. But they were also wrong. Not quite dog, not quite cat. There were 4 distinct toes, splayed wide like the animal had been crouching low. And there were a lot of them. Too many for one animal. At least 4 different sets. Maybe more. They circled the camp in a wide loop. Some crossed near the fire pit. One set had come right up to the back of the tent. The prints overlapped and blended, but they were fresh, edges still sharp in the dry ground. I crouched next to one and tried to picture the animal that made it. Whatever it was heavy. The impressions were deep, even in the compact dirt. I followed the trail to the edge of the creek, where it disappeared into the brush. I don't know why, but I felt sure whatever had been watching me hadn't just wandered through. It had waited for nightfall. It had stalked. And yet, nothing had happened. I wasn't attacked. Nothing was taken. No damage to the tent. It hadn't even tried to get into my food. It just watched, and paced, and left tracks to let me know it had been there. I packed up in under 10 minutes. No breakfast. No refill on water. I just crammed everything into my pack and left. I didn't run, but I walked fast, too fast for a trail like that. I tripped more than once, scraped my hands, tore my pants on a thorn branch. I kept expecting to hear that sound again. Soft rustling behind me. I kept checking over my shoulder. Nothing followed, but I didn't stop moving. When I finally made it to the car, I unlocked it with shaking hands, threw my gear in, and sat in the driver's seat with the door open for a long time. My shirt was soaked in sweat, and I realized I hadn't taken a full breath in what felt like an hour. The pressure had finally lifted. That feeling of being watched was gone. I wasn't safe exactly, but I was away. I don't know what was out there. I don't know if it was an animal or something worse, something human. I've looked at field guides, tried to match the tracks. Closest thing I found was a big coyote or maybe a wolf, but they weren't quite right. And those don't circle your tent all night without making a sound. And maybe it wasn't just one thing. I haven't gone camping alone since. And the worst part, the part that really sticks with me, wasn't the tracks or the sounds or even the way it circled all night. It was that the fear wasn't mine. It felt like it was being put into me, projected like heat from a fire or a scent in the air, as if something had learned how to make people afraid without showing itself. As if something had wanted me to feel what it felt. And it worked. In the late 1980s, I was in my early 20s. At that time, I was working for the Florida Park Service, along with one of my closest friends. We were both stationed in different parks, but we shared a mutual love of the outdoors and had done a lot of camping together, both through work and on our own. Back then, Park employees had the privilege of camping for free in other state parks. So on a long weekend, we decided to take advantage of that and drive a few hours inland to a lesser visited state park in Central Florida. It was the middle of spring, not too hot, not too buggy yet, and the humidity hadn't reached its summer peak. Everything was just starting to green up fully after winter, and the air had that earthy, piney smell that I always associated with the central region of the state. Dry oak scrub mixed with palmettos and pine needles baking in the sun. Along for the trip was a third friend, someone we both knew from town, but she wasn't in the park service. In fact, she had never even been camping before. This was her first time spending a night outdoors, and she was excited about it in the way people are when they're stepping into something unfamiliar but romanticized. She had all the gear but none of the experience, and it was kind of endearing to watch her try to get her tent set up or figure out how to work a camp stove. We were camped in what they called the youth area, essentially a big clearing in the woods with a few scattered picnic tables, an old metal fire ring, and a single water spigot out near the edge of the tree line. It was more primitive than the main campground and a little more isolated. On a map, it was about a half-mile from the main road, accessed by a narrow dirt track that looped in and out. The area was mostly used for school groups or scouts, but we had it entirely to ourselves that weekend, which was ideal. The quiet is what I loved about those places most. We had gotten in on a Friday evening, set up our tents, gathered some wood, and spent most of that first night just catching up around the fire. The second day we explored the trails a bit, wandered into the hardwood hammocks, and walked a few loops around the scrub. The park was mostly flat pine woods and oak with palmetto underbrush, and some wetlands here and there. Gopher tortoise burrows dotted the dry, sandy sections, and we passed a few snakes along the trails, mostly harmless ones, though the dusky pygmy rattlers were always around. That afternoon, we each drifted off into our own little activities. I wandered off to collect more firewood before the sun dipped too low, heading off trail a bit, but staying within shouting distance. I remember the moment pretty clearly now. I was bent over picking up a few branches, nothing large, and I had that weird sensation. You know when you feel like someone's looking at you? Like the hairs on your arms just rise a little for no reason? That's how it started. I paused, glanced around the woods, and didn't see anything. Heard nothing either. No wind, no birds, no bugs. Just quiet. A little too quiet. But then the moment passed, and I figured maybe I was just being overaware because we were so far out. Back at camp, the sun dropped fast behind the trees. We got the fire going early, and just as it was starting to settle into coals, one of the rangers who lived in a house near the main office drove up in an old green park truck. He brought us a load of firewood, probably leftovers from a trail clearing operation, and a six-pack of beer. He sat around for a while, shooting the breeze, talking shop with my coworker. Eventually, some loud voices carried through the woods from a few miles out. The ranger said it was probably some teenagers messing around on the trails. Since the park closed its trails at sunset, he and my friend decided to drive out and tell them to pack it up. That left me and the third friend, the first-timer, alone at the fire. We weren't worried. It was peaceful, and the fire gave off plenty of light. We just sat there, sipping beer, watching the flames, and enjoying the quiet again. No bugs, no cars, no music, just the crackling of the fire and the occasional pop from sap in the wood. We weren't even really talking at that point, just enjoying the stillness. Then it started. At first, it was that same feeling I'd had earlier, a prickling along my neck, like static. I tried to brush it off, but it wasn't going away. I looked across the fire at my friend and could tell by her posture that something had shifted for her. 2. The air felt heavier, like something had dropped into the woods around us. It wasn't a sound or movement that tipped me off. It was something deeper, something I felt in my stomach. Dread, pure physical dread. My skin got cold, even though the fire was burning strong and warm. I sat still, trying to make sense of it. Every instinct I had from growing up outdoors, from working in remote parks, told me we weren't alone. Not just not alone, but not safe. I tried to scan the tree line, but the shadows beyond the fire's reach were thick. I thought about black bears, maybe a big cat, but I'd never felt this kind of fear before around animals, even in close encounters. This was different. We didn't say anything to each other, but it was like we could read each other's thoughts. Slowly, calmly, we both got up and started walking toward the car, which was parked about 100 yards down the trail from the campsite. We didn't run at first. We didn't want to seem afraid, but the closer we got, the more intense the pressure got. Like the air behind us was full of something we couldn't see. When we were about halfway there, we locked eyes, and without a word, we just took off. Dead sprint. I've never run like that in my life. We dove into the car, slammed the doors shut, locked them, and just sat there with the engine off and the headlights on. The fire flickered in the rearview mirror. The woods looked empty, still, and yet I could feel something thick and awful pressing around the car, like we were being watched from all sides. I sat there holding my pistol. I had it with me in the glove box, just a little revolver I kept around when camping in bear country. But I remember thinking, holding it in my lap, that it felt like a toy, useless. Whatever was out there, if it came for us, that pistol wasn't going to help. I felt like a kid pretending to be brave. Neither of us looked around. We both stared dead ahead, too afraid to look to the side, because it felt like if we did, we'd see something staring back, and that it might break us. That's not an exaggeration. The fear was so total, so complete, it wasn't just about danger, it was about losing our minds. It was like whatever was near us had weight, a presence that pushed into you, made your thoughts jittery, your vision narrow. Then, after a time, it's hard to say how long, maybe 10 minutes, maybe just 2, the pressure just lifted. The stillness remained, but the dread faded. I could breathe again. I felt my heart rate drop. I could think again. I felt human again. We waited a little longer. Then, finally, headlights appeared down the trail. The truck returned, and the ranger and my coworker got out, laughing, carrying the rest of the beer. Everything seemed normal. Too normal. My friend and I just looked at each other and never said a word about what we'd felt while they were gone. That night, we both slept in the car. I kept the gun on my lap the whole time. I don't think I slept more than an hour, dozing in and out, watching the woods through the windshield. Nothing came, nothing moved, but I didn't feel safe until the sun came up. The next morning, we quietly packed everything up. The friend who'd slept in her tent had no idea how bad it had been for us. We all just brushed it off, made light of it, said the woods were weird that night. But the truth was, I'd never felt fear like that before, and I haven't since. Not once. Not even in much more objectively dangerous situations. I've worked in remote places. I've seen panthers, bears, drunk people with guns. But nothing has ever made me feel like whatever that was in those woods. I never saw it. I never heard it. But I know it was there. I don't have a name for what it was. I don't think it was supernatural. I think it was a person, or maybe people, watching us, waiting, but not in a normal way. There was no sound, no footsteps, no branches cracking, and it left no sign behind. I don't know what would have happened if we hadn't gone to the car. I don't want to know, but I'm sure of one thing, we weren't just scared. We were in danger, real danger. That kind of fear doesn't come from nothing, and I never camped in that park again. I used to surf a lot when I was younger. I still go out once in a while, but it's not like before. Back then, I'd go 5 or 6 times a week, sometimes even twice a day if the tide and wind lined up right. My whole life kind of orbited around the water. I was living up around Half Moon Bay for a while, and later I bounced between Santa Cruz and the outer edge of San Francisco. I knew all the breaks. I'd watch the weather like a hawk, knew where to go depending on the swell angle and the crowd. Sunrise sessions, cold-ass foggy evenings, even some midnight ones when the moon was bright enough and I knew the beach well enough to feel safe. But that feeling, that weird prickle in your gut like something is wrong, happened more times than I'd like to admit. I never told anyone about it until one night when I was drinking beers with a buddy of mine who worked for some organization that studied shark behavior. He worked off the California coast, doing research mostly around the Farallon Islands, but also tracking movements down around Santa Cruz and sometimes farther south. We were just sitting around talking about surfing, swapping stories. I told him that sometimes I'd be out there, everything looking fine, waves clean, not too crowded, just perfect, and I'd get spooked. No real reason, just a sense that I wasn't alone, like something was watching. I used to think it was just my mind playing tricks. Maybe I was tired. Maybe I'd been watching too many shark documentaries, but it felt real. He got real serious when I told him that. He said that's something a lot of shark attack survivors say, that they felt that same thing before it happened. Something deep inside us, left over from evolution, still able to pick up on danger even when our brains haven't caught up. He said when that happens, get out. Every time. Even if you feel dumb or embarrassed, just go. Because there's probably something nearby that you don't want to meet. That stuck with me more than I realized. A few years after that conversation, I ended up taking a break from surfing. Life got busier. I moved inland for a while, got caught up in work, and didn't see the ocean for almost a year. When I moved back toward the coast, I wasn't surfing the same way anymore. Something had shifted. I still loved the ocean, but the pull wasn't as strong. I started hiking and camping more. Maybe it was a way to keep that closeness to nature without the part that scared me. This story happened last year, just before fall, somewhere along the Big Sur coast. I'm not going to say the exact spot because I don't want people looking for it. But it was backcountry, off a little-used trail that hooks around the cliffs and drops into a hard-to-reach cove. Not many people hike that far, and fewer stay overnight, which was exactly why I picked it. I left my truck at a turnout along Highway 1, loaded up my pack, and started hiking around noon. Weather was good. Not too hot, light breeze. The trail was narrow and overgrown in some places. I had to duck and push through thick brush, especially where the cliffs curved inland. The trail had clearly once been used more, but not anymore. I saw no fresh prints, no trash, nothing. It took me about 4 hours to make it to the spot I had in mind. It was a small clearing on a bluff, maybe 30 yards across, with short grass and some low shrubs. One side dropped sharply into the rocky surf, and the other was backed by dense woods that ran uphill. From where I set up my tent, I could see a little stretch of shoreline far below and a cove that looked like it hadn't seen a person in a decade. No footprints, no fires, just raw coast. I set up camp and cooked some simple food, just a bag of freeze-dried rice and beans, and watched the sun dip into the water. It was beautiful. Wind in the trees, steady waves crashing below. I stayed up until full dark, then crawled into the tent and tried to sleep. That night, something felt off. I couldn't explain it, just like back when I was surfing. The wind had died down. The trees weren't moving anymore. The ocean was still making noise, but it sounded farther away somehow. It was like someone had turned the world down a notch. I lay there in my bag, eyes open, heart beating just a little faster than it should have been. I didn't hear anything at first, just that emptiness. But then I felt it, more than heard it, a low pressure like something heavy had passed over the tent. It made no sound, but the kind of silence that followed it was wrong. Not peaceful, but expectant, like whatever had caused it wasn't done yet. I sat up, unzipped the tent slowly, and looked out. Nothing, just darkness. I had no fire, just a small lantern that I kept low to not attract attention. I clicked it on and panned the clearing. Still nothing, but the feeling didn't go away. I stayed awake most of the night, sitting upright, listening. Once or twice I thought I heard faint crunching sounds up the hill, like someone stepping on dry grass, but they stopped as soon as I noticed them. By morning, the feeling had faded. I made coffee, walked the bluff, even climbed down to the cove and explored the tide pools. Everything looked normal. I told myself I was just spooked from being alone. I'd done this kind of trip dozens of times, and being alone always plays tricks on the mind. I stayed a second night. The second day was uneventful until just before sunset. I was gathering dry wood near the edge of the tree line when I found something that didn't belong. It was a piece of driftwood jammed into the ground like a stake, up on the hill maybe 30 yards behind my camp. About 3 feet tall, sharpened at one end. Could have been natural, sure, but it was wedged down tight, not something the wind would have done. It wasn't there the day before. I left it alone, went back to camp, ate quickly. The sun was going down fast, and that bad feeling was back. Stronger this time. I didn't sleep that night. Something was near the tent. I didn't hear breathing or see movement, but I could feel it. The ground seemed to hold its breath. Every now and then I'd hear a small crack, like a twig breaking, but spaced far apart, like something circling slowly, not rushing, watching. I held my knife and just sat there in the dark, waiting. I didn't use the lantern. I didn't want to give away my exact spot. The moon was bright enough to see shapes and outlines. I thought I saw something move between two trees, tall and fast, but when I looked again, it was gone. I made it to morning, but I was drained. My whole body felt like I'd been bracing for a fight all night. I packed up fast, shoved everything in my pack, and didn't even bother eating. I just wanted out. The trail back felt longer. The sun was hot. Every few hundred feet I'd stop and listen, convinced I was hearing steps behind me. But every time I stopped, the sound stopped too. The only thing that kept me from full-on panic was the fact that it was daylight. But that didn't mean much. Not out there. I'd gone deep enough into the backcountry that even if I screamed, no one would hear. About halfway back, I stopped to rest. I took off my pack, bent over to stretch my back, and saw prints in the dirt just off the trail. They weren't mine. Too big, wide heel, deep impression. No tread, just bare. The weird thing was how far apart they were. Whatever made them had a long stride, like 7, maybe 8 feet between each one. I didn't look for more. I just kept moving. When I got back to the truck, I felt a kind of relief I hadn't felt in years. That pressure, like something had been pressing on me the whole time, finally lifted. I got in, locked the doors, and drove without stopping until I hit a small diner outside Carmel. I didn't tell anyone about what happened, not for a long time, but I started looking into things. Not ghosts or monsters. I'm not into that crap. I looked up animal behavior, predator patterns. I found stories about people getting that watched feeling before a mountain lion attack, or before stumbling on a bear. I even read about infrasound, low-frequency noise that we can't consciously hear but can still affect us physically. Some big predators can produce it. Tigers, for example, use it to stun prey. Whales too. I don't know if anything along the California coast does, but maybe something similar is at play. There's something ancient in us, I think. Some leftover instinct. Something that kicks in when we're being hunted. I felt it in the water, and now I've felt it in the woods. Whatever was out there that night, it wasn't just passing through. It was watching, waiting. I don't know if it was human, animal, or something in between, but it knew the land better than me, moved quieter than me. It wanted me to feel that fear, and it succeeded. I still camp, but not alone, not in places I don't know. And when that feeling comes back, the hair on the arms, the cold in the gut, I don't ignore it anymore. I leave, right away, because something out there knows what we are before we even see it, and it waits. I used to spend a lot of time in the water. I grew up in California and learned to surf young. It became a daily part of my life. Before school, after work, whenever I could make the time. The Pacific felt familiar, even with all its moods. Could be moody, violent, cold, full of currents that pulled hard and long, but I felt like I understood it. I respected it. I had some close calls, sure, but I never felt spooked. Not really. I moved to the East Coast in my early 30s. A job shift and the need for something new. It was a big change. Different pace, different people, different water. I figured I'd adapt like I always had. Bought a cheap used board, scoped out a few beach breaks, tried to fall back into the rhythm. But from the start, it was different. I didn't like the water here. I couldn't explain it. The waves were inconsistent. The water looked darker, more brown and green than the steel blue I was used to. And when I paddled out, I felt uneasy. That's not something I said lightly. After years of surfing, you learn the difference between nerves and instinct. You can tell when it's just your brain playing tricks and when it's something real. Out west, I'd get the occasional jolt of fear, sure, but it would pass. On the East Coast, it didn't. It sat with me. Every time I paddled out, I felt like I didn't belong. One afternoon, I was walking the beach near my apartment, just killing time, and struck up a conversation with this old guy. He said he used to be a lifeguard along the stretch for decades. We talked shop, ocean stuff, weather patterns. I told him about the difference I felt surfing here compared to back home. I said something like, I never felt scared out west, but here, it's like the water doesn't want me in it. He looked at me for a second, then said, well, girl, there's just a whole lot of death in these waters, and you're probably sensing that. He didn't say it in a dramatic way. It was matter of fact, like he was talking about the tide. He started listing off wrecks and drownings and boats that never came back. It wasn't hard to believe. These waters have seen centuries of shipping, storms, war, and loss. The Atlantic has swallowed a lot of lives. After that, I stopped surfing here. I didn't make a big decision about it, I just gradually stopped taking the board out. But the water still called to me in a way. I started hiking the coast instead, spending weekends exploring little coves and inlets, walking old trails through the scrub and saltgrass. Sometimes I'd camp for a night, just me and my pack, a few miles from the nearest road. I liked the solitude. I liked the idea of being near the water, even if I didn't go in. One weekend, I planned a solo camping trip along a lesser-known stretch of the coastline, about 3 hours from where I lived. I'd done some research and found an old maritime path that followed the edge of the cliffs, winding through thickets of pine and dune brush, with a few flat spots where you could pitch a tent if you weren't picky. The area wasn't part of any popular trail network, but it wasn't completely off-grid either. A few locals knew it. Fishermen used it, but you wouldn't run into many people. I drove out early Saturday morning, parked where the road turned to gravel, and hiked in a couple miles. The path was soft sand in places, tough going with a loaded pack, but the air was clean and smelled like pine needles and salt. I found a good spot on a bluff overlooking the water, flat enough to sleep on, with a few low trees for cover and a view of the ocean beyond the drop. I could hear the waves from up there, even if I couldn't see the beach clearly through the thicket that lined the edge. I set up camp slowly, enjoying the process. Tent, small fire ring, my chair and gear laid out the way I liked it. There was a stiff breeze coming in off the water, but the sun was out and it wasn't cold. I spent the afternoon walking south along the trail, picking my way down to a rock-strewn shoreline. No one around, just driftwood, seaweed, and the occasional crabs scuttling between pools. The cliffs above were crumbling in places, raw earth exposed like old bones. By the time I got back to camp, the light was starting to shift. I made a small fire, heated up a meal, and sat with my back to the trees, facing the ocean. It was one of those moments that felt clean and still. I didn't feel afraid. I felt alert. But that feeling I'd had in the water out here, that didn't quite go away. I didn't want to climb down and swim, didn't even want to sit too close to the bluff's edge. After dark, I doused the fire and crawled into the tent. I kept the rain fly open to let the breeze through the mesh, and lay on top of my bag with my eyes open, listening. The waves below were steady, a low rumble that rose and fell like breathing. I could hear the trees shifting in the wind, a rustle like paper, and beneath it something else, faint metal sound, not loud, just a quick clink. Then again, it stopped, and I thought maybe it was something in my pack shifting. I waited, nothing. The wind picked up for a while, then settled. I must have drifted off because when I opened my eyes again, the moon had moved higher and the sound was back, this time clearer. It was the unmistakable sound of metal on metal, not sharp or sudden, more like a chain being pulled across rock. I sat up and held my breath. It didn't repeat. I didn't hear any footsteps, no voices, no animals, but that unease was back in full. My pulse picked up and I found myself wishing I'd camped closer to the car. I grabbed my flashlight, zipped the tent closed behind me, and walked a slow circle around camp. I didn't see anything. The beam caught the white gleam of driftwood far below and nothing else. Still, I didn't sleep much. The next morning, the air was heavy and damp. Fog rolled in thick and low, clinging to the trees. I made coffee and sat watching the edge of the bluff, thinking about leaving early. I wasn't afraid of fog, but something about the weight of it, the way it pressed in from every side, made me feel boxed in. Still, I stayed. Pride, maybe. I told myself I'd hike out the next morning. That day, I hiked north instead, deeper along the coast. The fog made it feel like I was moving through a tunnel. Everything beyond 10 feet faded to white. I found another small path that led down to the rocks and spent some time there eating a snack, watching the sea slap against the stone. At one point, I saw something float by out in the water. It was long, black, half submerged. Could have been a log, could have been something else. I kept watching, but it didn't surface again. That night, I was even more on edge. I kept thinking about what the old lifeguard had said, about all the death in these waters. The fog never lifted. The air was still. I didn't start a fire, just ate cold food, zipped into the tent early, and lay listening again. The chain sound came back, louder this time. It wasn't far. It was steady, metal dragging across stone, then pausing, then moving again. I waited for other sounds to follow, but nothing did. Just that rhythm. I tried to tell myself it was a boat offshore, some buoy or anchor shifting with the tide. But I knew the sound was coming from land, from close. I didn't sleep. I lay there until dawn, pack ready, boots on, just waiting. When it was light enough to see, I broke camp fast. Didn't eat, didn't drink, just moved. The fog was thinner that morning, but still clung to the underbrush. The trail felt narrower. I kept hearing things behind me, not footsteps, more like the sound of something being pulled. Once, I stopped and heard breathing. Not my own. Low, labored, wet. I didn't look. I walked fast and didn't stop. When I made it to the car, I threw everything in the back, climbed in, and locked the doors before I even started the engine. I didn't relax until I was back on the highway miles inland. Back home, I looked up the area. Shipwrecks, like the old guy said, dozens. One in particular caught my attention. A trawler that had gone down about a mile off the coast near where I'd camped. No distress signal, just vanished. They recovered the wreck weeks later, found evidence of damage, scrape marks, impact wounds, pieces torn away, but no signs of fire or explosion. The strangest thing, all the chains used for the netting gear had been removed, not cut, just gone. They never found the crew. I didn't go back. I still hike, still camp, but I stay inland now. The ocean's always been powerful, but out here, feels like it remembers things, holds onto them. Maybe it's not ghosts or monsters. Maybe it's just time and death layered so thick they never really settle. Whatever it is, I listen to that feeling now. When the water or the land tells you not to stay, you leave. Simple as that. I've spent most of my life chasing silence. Not peace exactly, just silence. That full kind of quiet that you can only find when you're far away from people, far from traffic or machines or lights buzzing overhead. The kind of silence where your ears start picking up on things they usually miss. Wind pressing against rocks, dry leaves shifting, your own breath. This is why I go out into the desert. Not for the heat or the view or any spiritual reason, just for the quiet. There's a part of the desert a few hours drive from where I live that always gave me that feeling. No service, no cars on the horizon, just land and sky. I'd been out there more than a few times. Always felt safe. Always felt empty in a good way. This happened about a year ago, sometime in late October. The days were still warm, but the nights were just starting to get cold. I decided to go out for one night, not even to camp, just to park, hike a short distance, lay out on a blanket and look at the stars. No tent, no fire, no food to cook. Just me, a small cooler of water and snacks, a flashlight, and a friend. My friend, I'll call her Sarah, had never been to this spot. She liked stargazing too and was always talking about how badly she wanted to see a sky full of stars with no light pollution. I told her I knew a perfect spot, and that night we left town just before sunset. The drive was long but uneventful. We brought music and talked most of the way. There was nothing unusual about it at all. The road turns to dirt for the last few miles, and you have to go slow or risk tearing up your tires. There's a pull-off area near a wide flat section surrounded by low hills. From there, you hike about a quarter mile over some shallow ridges to get to this open spot. Basically a plateau that dips slightly in the center, protected from the wind on most sides but wide enough to give you a full view of the sky. I'd been there just the day before, in the late afternoon, to make sure the trail was still good and that nobody had set up camp there. It was empty and clean. We parked and got out. The air was cooler than I expected. I popped the trunk and grabbed the blanket and flashlight. We walked in side by side, following the same trail I'd walked the day before. No talking now. It was quiet enough that the crunch of our boots on the sand and gravel seemed almost too loud. It always gets like that out there after dark. Sound stretches. We reached the spot and laid out the blanket. I dropped my backpack beside it, clicked the flashlight off, and sat down. We sat in silence for a while, just adjusting to the dark. The stars came slowly. They always do. First a few, then a dozen, then the whole sky fills in. I leaned back on my elbows and stared up. Sarah was lying fully on her back beside me, already quiet. I figured she was just getting into the moment. She was still, maybe too still. I remember brushing some gravel away from my arm and realizing how cold the ground was already. The first 10 minutes passed without anything weird. It wasn't until I fully laid back and tried to relax that the feeling came over me. And it didn't come like a sudden jolt or anything. It was more like a weight lowering onto my chest, a dull pressure I couldn't name. I thought maybe I'd just gotten too cold, or maybe it was the way I was laying. But I sat up and it didn't go away. The pressure stayed, and now there was something else too. A prickling on the back of my neck, like static, like I was being watched. That's not a phrase I use lightly. It sounds cliche, but it felt real, like something was standing just out of sight. And I knew how wide open this spot was. I knew there was nowhere for anything to hide. That somehow made it worse. I didn't want to scare Sarah, so I looked over slowly. She was sitting up too now, arms wrapped around her knees, eyes scanning the dark. Her body language told me everything. She felt it too. Neither of us spoke. No words were needed. I reached for the flashlight, turned it on, and swept it slowly over the ridge lines. Nothing. No movement, no animals, no shapes. The desert was dead still. That silence I used to crave, it was unbearable now. It wasn't peaceful. Felt wrong. Like the whole desert had frozen. I remember listening for anything. An insect, a gust of wind, even the sound of my own heartbeat, but it felt like everything had stopped. We stayed there, frozen, for another minute or so. That's a long time when every cell in your body is telling you to run. Then I stood up and grabbed the blanket and pack in one motion. I didn't run. I just turned and walked, flashlight beam bouncing ahead of me. Sarah was right behind me. She stayed close. We didn't talk. The only sound was our boots moving faster and faster over the dirt trail. I didn't want to look behind me, but I kept imagining something following us. Not a person, not an animal, just something. We got back to the car. I tossed the blanket and pack into the back seat, and Sarah got in without hesitation. The interior of the car felt too small. The dome light seemed too bright. My hands were trembling when I put the key in the ignition. The car started and we pulled away. I didn't look in the rearview mirror until we were back on the paved road. I felt fear before, real fear. I've gotten lost hiking once. I've had close calls on the freeway, but this was different. This was primal. My body decided it was in danger before my brain knew why. And the moment we left that place, once the ridges were behind us and the highway opened up, the pressure was gone, like someone had lifted their foot off my chest. The fear didn't vanish completely, but it stopped crawling under my skin. My breathing slowed. I noticed Sarah had finally looked out the window instead of straight ahead. We got back to my apartment maybe 40 minutes later. I parked and we went inside without a word. Only once the door was closed and locked behind us did I really start to feel normal again. My heart rate came down. My thoughts felt more grounded. I realized how tight my muscles had been the whole time. My back and neck were sore for hours afterward. We never figured out what caused that reaction. Maybe nothing happened. Maybe it was some weird overlapping panic we both had, like shared paranoia. I don't know. But I'd been to that spot in the desert at least 10 times before and never once felt anything like that. I've never gone back. The strangest part is that there was nothing I could point to and say, that's what scared me. No movement, no sound, no figure in the dark. Just the absolute certainty that we weren't supposed to be there. Like the place had changed since the day before. Like it had turned against us. Sometimes I think about going back just to prove to myself that it was all in my head. But every time I think about it, I remember the silence. Not the peaceful kind, the other kind. The kind that makes your instincts kick in even when there's nothing there. And I think I'm fine not knowing. Some places just don't want you in them. And when they make that clear, it's best to listen. I used to read scary stories at night as a kind of ritual. I'd be lying there in bed in my dark room, phone in hand, eyes scrolling through threads and stories that claimed to be real. Stuff about campers hearing footsteps outside their tents, or hikers getting followed for miles through dense woods by something they never saw. Most of them weren't anything special. Some were clearly fake, some were well written but too far-fetched to be real. But every once in a while, there'd be a post or a comment that really got under my skin. It always started the same. Someone saying something like, "I'm reading this in bed in the dark, LOL." That was me. I liked the thrill, I guess. It made the silence in my room feel sharper, like the shadows had more weight. But those stories were just stories. Or at least that's what I told myself. Last fall, I went on a solo camping trip. I'd done a few of them before. Not because I don't have friends, but because I genuinely like being alone outdoors. There's something really calming about being out in the middle of nowhere where nobody can bother you. The quiet, the smell of pine, the way the light cuts through the trees in the morning. It's the opposite of reading scary stories in bed. It's grounding, real. I picked a national forest that I'd camped in once before, a few hours from home. There were plenty of trails and a lot of dispersed camping areas. No reservations, no numbered spots. Just park and hike in until you find a clearing. I chose a weekday to avoid crowds, and when I got there, I only saw 2 other vehicles at the trailhead. Perfect. I packed light, just a single-person tent, some food, water, stove, a few changes of clothes, a map, and a knife. No cell service once you got more than a mile in. That was part of the draw. I hiked in about 3 miles before I found a spot I liked. It wasn't anything special, just a flat clearing with enough space between the trees and a few good rocks for sitting. A little downhill was a creek. I couldn't see it, but I could hear the water moving when the wind wasn't blowing. That constant trickle in the background was nice. A steady sound in the otherwise complete stillness. I set up camp. The tent went up easy, and I laid out my sleeping bag inside and unpacked the rest. I gathered some dry sticks and logs, started a small fire, and boiled water for a dehydrated meal. The sun was getting low, and the temperature dropped fast as it dipped behind the ridge. Once it got dark, it got dark. No moon, no light pollution. The fire was my only light source, and it cast a flickering wall of orange around me that ended in total black. I sat on one of the larger rocks with my meal and just listened. Every now and then a gust of wind would rustle the trees, or I'd hear some tiny crack from deep in the woods, probably just a squirrel or a branch shifting. But mostly it was just quiet, that dense kind of quiet that presses in on you after a while. I stayed out by the fire for a while before turning in, maybe around 10. I packed everything up neatly, put all the food in a bag and hung it from a tree branch a good distance from camp, made sure the fire was fully out, and zipped myself into the tent. I checked my watch. 10:42. Inside the tent, I laid there in my bag, headlamp turned off, darkness pressing against the thin fabric walls. I wasn't tired, but I didn't want to waste the battery on my phone by watching downloaded shows. So I scrolled through notes I had saved, some random articles, some writing prompts, and then, of course, scary stories. I had saved a few from Reddit. I started reading one I'd already read before about a guy who heard breathing outside his tent all night. I remember thinking how similar it was to how I was literally doing what he had been doing. Alone, in the dark, with no one around for miles. That story ended the way a lot of them do. He makes it out alive, nobody ever sees anything, just fear and guessing and that lingering sense of being watched. I locked my phone, shoved it in the side pouch of the tent, and lay in the dark, staring at the ceiling. No stars inside the tent, just the faint outline of the poles holding it up. At some point, I fell asleep. I woke up an hour or 2 later. I didn't check the time, but it was still deep in the night. No faint glow of sunrise yet, just that thick kind of black where you can't even see your own hand in front of your face. I wasn't sure why I woke up, but my body felt off. Not in pain, just tense. Alert, like my muscles were a little tighter than they should be. I lay perfectly still and listened. Nothing. No wind. No water. Just silence. That was the first thing that really bothered me. I had fallen asleep to the sound of the creek, even though it was downhill. I should have still been able to hear it. But now, nothing. Like the entire forest had shut off. I listened harder, my ears strained. Still nothing. Then I heard it. Faint crunch. Distant. Like a single footstep. It was soft. Could have been anything. Could have been a branch falling from a tree. But it wasn't that. It was too deliberate. It came from the direction of the trail, from the same path I'd hiked in earlier. I stayed still, barely breathing. My hands gripped the inside of the sleeping bag. Another crunch. A little closer. I didn't want to turn on my headlamp. I didn't want to unzip the tent. I didn't want to do anything that would give away my position more than it already was. The fabric of the tent was thin. Anyone or anything out there would have seen the small dome easily. I was lit up inside by body heat. I was exposed. I waited. Another crunch. Still closer. Then a pause. Long enough that I thought maybe I'd imagined it. Then another crunch. This one on the side of the tent, maybe 20 feet away. I didn't have a weapon on me, just the knife in my backpack outside, zipped up in one of the side compartments. I'd always kept it there. I didn't think I'd need it while sleeping, but now it was all I could think about. I stayed perfectly still. Every sound seemed louder than it should have been. My own breath, my heartbeat, the fabric of the sleeping bag shifting. Then nothing. Nothing for so long that I almost started to think it had been in my head. Maybe the silence had played tricks on me. Maybe it was an animal, a deer, a fox. But just as I started to relax, I heard something again. Not a crunch this time, a slow, dragging sound, like a foot or something being pulled along the dirt and leaves. I couldn't move. My body had locked itself into the shape it was in. Every nerve in my body screamed to do something. Turn on the light, get out, yell, run, but I couldn't. The dragging stopped. Then another crunch, this time on the other side of the tent. Whoever or whatever it was, it had moved around me. I still didn't move. Then there was silence again. A longer one this time. Minutes passed. Then, as suddenly as it started, I heard one final crunch, farther away this time. Then another, fading. I lay there until the sun came up. When I unzipped the tent, the ground looked normal. No obvious footprints. But that's not surprising. Dry leaves cover everything, and even a heavy step barely leaves a mark. I walked the perimeter of my camp, circling it twice, looking for anything. Broken branches, dropped trash, anything out of place. I found nothing. I walked to the food bag. It was still there, hanging from the tree, untouched. I boiled water for instant coffee with shaking hands. I didn't eat. I packed up camp as fast as I could. I hiked back out, heart pounding the entire time, stopping more than once to listen behind me. The trail felt longer than it had the day before. My ears were ringing with silence. No birds, no wind. Back at the car, I loaded everything up and got in. Locked the doors before even starting the engine. My hands were still cold from the night, and they shook on the steering wheel as I pulled away. I didn't stop until I got to the gas station 30 miles away. I used the bathroom, bought a coffee, and sat in the parking lot with the engine running. I didn't tell anyone about what happened for a long time. When I finally did, they said what I already knew. It was probably an animal, or another camper, or my imagination. But I know what I heard. I know what silence sounds like. I've spent enough time in it to know when it changes. I still go camping, but never alone, and never in that part of the forest again. That night taught me something I'd always brushed off when I read about it in stories. Fear doesn't need a face. It doesn't need footsteps or breathing or anything specific. All it needs is silence, and just enough movement to make you realize you're not alone. And now, when I read comments that say, "I just love reading these when I'm lying in bed in the dark, lol," I get a different feeling. I've always been someone who trusts instincts. Maybe it's because of my line of work, or maybe it's just how I'm wired. But one thing I know for sure, there's this deep, ancient part of us, the fight or flight response, that kicks in when something is really wrong. Sometimes it's clear why you're scared, and sometimes you just can't put your finger on it. But when that feeling hits, you can't ignore it. This one trip I took still sticks with me years later. I was camping alone in the woods, somewhere far from any town, phone signal, or other people. It was early fall, the air crisp and dry. I picked a spot I'd found on a previous trip, off the beaten path. A small clearing near a creek with thick trees all around. I set up my tent, made a small fire, and settled in for the night. At first, everything seemed normal. The usual sounds of the forest, wind rustling leaves, distant bird calls, the soft bubbling of the creek, felt comforting. But as the night grew darker, the feeling started creeping in. At first, it was just a faint sense that something was off, like the air had shifted somehow. I thought maybe it was the silence. The woods had gone completely quiet, almost too quiet. I remember lying in my tent, staring at the dim glow of the fire outside, feeling like my skin was crawling but not knowing why. I kept telling myself it was nothing, just nerves, or maybe the isolation getting to me. I'd been camping alone plenty of times before and never felt scared like this. But the feeling wouldn't go away. It grew stronger, sharper, like a warning signal that something was watching me. I kept glancing toward the tree line, but I saw nothing but darkness and shadows. I thought about why I was feeling this way. Maybe it was infrasound, low-frequency sounds below the range of human hearing that can cause unease and anxiety. I'd read about it before. Maybe the wind was blowing through the trees in a way that made these sounds. But even knowing that didn't calm me down. Then I started hearing noises. First soft at the edge of hearing, just the crack of twigs snapping here and there, like something walking slowly and carefully. I froze and listened. The sounds came closer and then stopped right outside my tent. I held my breath and stayed as still as I could, gripping my knife. I circled the tent. I could hear footsteps, heavy, slow, and careful. Not like an animal, but like a person trying to be quiet but still making noise in the dry leaves. The hair on my neck stood straight up. My mind raced, going over every possible explanation, but there was no denying it. Someone was out there, close, watching me. I remembered my training and experience. I've dealt with people in my work who meant harm before, and there's always this unmistakable feeling. Something primal in your body that screams danger before you even see the threat. This was it. I didn't make a sound. I stayed inside the tent and waited. After what felt like forever, the footsteps slowly moved away, crunching through the leaves until they faded into silence. I waited a long time after that, too scared to move. When dawn finally broke, I slipped out of the tent and looked around. I found footprints, boots, fresh, human footprints circling my camp twice, just like the sounds I'd heard. They led off toward the creek, then disappeared into the thick woods. I packed up as fast as I could, my hands shaking. I didn't stop to eat or take a break. I drove away as soon as the truck was loaded, not looking back until I was miles down the road and out of the forest. I don't know who was out there or what they wanted. Maybe they were just someone passing through, but that didn't matter. What mattered was that my instincts saved me. That fight or flight feeling is real. It's not just some vague anxiety or imagination. It's our most basic survival tool. Since that trip, I never ignore that feeling anymore. If it ever creeps in, I act on it immediately. Sometimes that means leaving, sometimes it means preparing to defend myself. But I never wait to find out if I'm right or wrong. Because when it comes to real danger, you don't get second chances. That night out there was the closest I've ever felt to real fear in the wild. No ghosts, no stories. Just the cold, hard truth that sometimes something or someone is stalking you. And when that happens, your instincts are the only thing standing between you and whatever might come next. I never thought I'd come across something that felt truly off in the army. After all, we're trained to expect the unexpected. Ambushes, enemy contact, fatigue, the whole lot. But there was one night during an exercise that still sits heavy in my mind. It was one of those moments where everything seemed normal on the surface, but beneath it, something was just wrong. We were out in the bush, far from any base or city lights. The exercise was straightforward. We had to dig defensive pits at night. The idea was to practice setting up a position quickly in low visibility and be ready for an enemy attack. The ground was hard, the dirt dry and gritty. It took effort to dig, especially in the dark. Everyone had their assigned tasks, and we'd been working for hours. My buddy, let's call him Mark, was with me. We were in the same pit, shoulder to shoulder, digging out the earth and making the trench deeper. The moon was just a thin crescent, so light was scarce. The only illumination came from the faint glow of our headlamps, and even those we tried to keep low so we didn't give away our position. The pit was cramped, with jagged roots and rocks making the digging harder. I remember feeling the sweat on my brow mix with the dust from the dirt. The air smelled of dry leaves and the faint tang of metal, our gear and weapons left with us. Around us, the rest of the section worked on their own tasks, and out front, some guys were on piquet duty watching for any movement. Later on, stories started going around that multiple people had seen Mark digging in our pit even when he was supposed to be on guard. First, we shrugged it off. Maybe someone was confused. It was a long night, and with everyone tired, it wasn't unusual for people to mistake shadows or movement. But then the section commander saw him too. This is the part that gets me. According to the section commander, he was walking past our position and saw Mark standing perfectly still in the pit. No digging, no movement, just standing there. That alone was strange because at that time, Mark was supposed to be digging. The section commander called over the second-in-command to check it out. When the second-in-command approached the pit and asked what Mark was doing, Mark suddenly scrambled out of the hole and sprinted off into the darkness. Completely silent. No warning. Just gone. That behavior was totally against everything we'd been trained for. In an army position, especially one set up in the dark with trenches, pits, barbed wire, and other obstacles, running off without a word was dangerous and reckless. Could get you seriously hurt or worse. And the fact that Mark disappeared into the bush without anyone able to catch him or see where he went was unsettling. Here's the kicker. At the exact same time this was happening, Mark was actually on piquet duty, standing out the front with another soldier. So the guy running off from the pit couldn't have been him. Yet multiple people had seen it, myself included, and the section commander swore he saw it too. We couldn't explain it. No one talked about it openly for a while because it sounded crazy. It didn't fit any normal scenario we knew. People joked about him having a twin or a doppelganger, but those were just jokes to try and shake off the unease. I kept thinking back to the details, trying to make sense of it all. The pit we were digging wasn't in a place that had any easy access. You had to step over barbed wire to get close, and the ground around it was uneven and full of hazards. Anyone running off into the dark would risk falling into one of the other pits, getting caught on wire, or tripping in the rough terrain. And yet, the figure did just that. They sprinted straight into the bush, disappearing without a sound. That night, after Mark returned from his piquet shift, we all looked at him carefully, half expecting some explanation, but he said nothing about the incident. It was like he had no idea what anyone was talking about. I checked with the other soldier who was with Mark on guard duty, and he confirmed they never left the post during that time. They'd stayed exactly where they were, alert and watching. So who was it? That question haunted me. In the army, especially during exercises, we learned to be suspicious of everything. Enemy movement, traps, hidden snipers. We learned that the mind can play tricks on you when you're tired, and that fear can mess with your perception. But this wasn't just fatigue or paranoia. Multiple people saw the same thing, and the figure acted too deliberately for it to be a mistake. I started to think about the possibilities. Could someone have been stalking us? Maybe an enemy scout trying to get close without being noticed? But this was an exercise area, not a real battlefield, and our perimeter was secure. No one else was supposed to be there. Could it have been a wild animal? But no animal moves like a man, especially not running off so quickly and stopping still in a pit as if watching. The movement was too human. Could it have been some kind of hallucination caused by stress or exhaustion? But again, it happened to several people independently, which made that unlikely. The more I tried to reason it out, the less sense it made. After that night, things got tense around the camp. Everyone was more alert. We set watches tighter, double-checked every corner, and moved cautiously. I noticed how my senses had sharpened too. Every small noise made me look up. The rustle of leaves sounded louder. The creaking of branches felt like footsteps. The hairs on my neck stood straight whenever I heard anything unfamiliar. One night, lying in my sleeping bag, I swore I heard footsteps crunching nearby. Not the normal sounds of animals or the wind, but deliberate, slow steps, as if someone was moving carefully through the brush. I froze and waited, heart pounding. Nothing came into view, but the sound stayed for minutes before fading away. I didn't sleep well after that. When the exercise finally ended and we packed up, the tension eased a bit. But I never forgot that night. It made me realize something important. Sometimes, no matter how trained or prepared you are, there are things out there you can't explain easily. The human mind wants to understand, to label every experience. But the truth is, sometimes you just have to accept that your instincts know something is wrong, even if you can't prove what it is. And that feeling, that sense of being watched or stalked, is real. It's a warning, something deep inside telling you to stay alert, to stay alive. Mark never talked about that night. Neither did anyone else. The army moves on quickly, and stories like that get buried beneath drills and missions. But I remember the strange figure in the pit, standing still, then sprinting into the dark. I remember the fear that pulsed through me, the cold grip of the unknown. And I remember to always trust those feelings. Because when your body screams danger, it's not just noise. It's the oldest, most powerful survival tool we have. Ignore it at your own risk.